Malaysia Day, the day that people from Sabah, Sarawak and the Peninsula get together in one tight group hug and celebrate our love for the beautiful country called Malaysia. But this is not always the case though. For Sabah, one of the reasons for not always enjoying our little group hug is an initiative known as Project IC. We all know the story. In 1963, the government of Malaya invited Sabah, Sarawak, and Singapore to come together and form Malaysia. The agreement was that all parties would be equal partners in this new nation. There's also language that acknowledges each partner's unique cultural heritage, from having no official state religion to personal choice over their official language. But as it turns out, government policies often did not reflect this agreement. One policy, known as Project IC, drastically re-engineered Sabah's population. From the 60s to early 2000s, Sabah's population grew by 300%. When compared with other states, the anomaly is unmissable. It wasn't just net population numbers that changed. The composition changed drastically too. The percentage of Muslims in Sabah as registered in the 1960 census was at 37.9%, with non-Muslims making up the majority at 62.1%. According to the 2010 census, Muslims are now the majority at 65.4%. Suspicions arose in the 90s with NRD officers being arrested under the ISA specifically over their involvement in issuing various documents to illegal immigrants. These documents included MyCard receipts, and IMM13 cards. Then, in 1999, the election results for the Likas constituency was nullified after thousands of dubious names were found on the electoral vote, and Sabahans started demanding answers. In 2012, a good decade and some years later, a Royal Commission of Inquiry, RCI, was formed to investigate the claim. It was chaired by Tan Sri Steve Shim, the former Chief Judge of Sabah and Sarawak, and spanned 18 months, with over 300 witnesses brought forward. Details started to emerge showing that from the 1970s, identity cards were issued en masse to non-citizens, most of whom were recent migrants or refugees. In 2013, the RCI came to a conclusion. It was found that Project IC was more likely than not to have happened, to some extent validating that there was a population engineering program that had taken place.
There was this excess of people who were undocumented. They were irregular by way of status. They probably didn't have any visa. Most probably came into the country illicitly. And so they came to Sabah because, first of all, there's a huge cultural proximity. People who lived in Mindanao, for example, they share very strong cultural ties with people who are living in the east coast of Sabah. There's a lot of political stability compared to what was going on in Mindanao in the 1970s. There was a sort of historical belief that the east coast of Sabah belonged to them. Project IC happened in a space where they utilized the people that were already there. They didn't necessarily invite more people in.
The RCI concluded that Project IC was the work of rogue NRD officers out for extra income. But it did not, however, make any claims or refute whether it was a top-down directive. The report did not set out to find guilty parties. Resultantly, no legal actions have been taken against any complicitors. While the inquiry did not mention any political motivations behind Project IC, the political party that benefited most from this changed demographic was clearly UMNO. They joined the Sabahan political fray in 1994, campaigning in what was essentially a re-engineered demographic. They subsequently won their first ever election in Sabah after some defection from the opposition party.
For the first 3 decades of its rule, Sabah politics was very unstable. Almost every 10 years you had a new government. And also in the 1980s, Parti Bersatu Sabah took power. And the federal government didn't like it because they saw Parti Bersatu Sabah as a Christian government. The main point of Project IC was to make Sabah a Muslim majority state. And therefore, in terms of the voting pattern, in terms of the seats in Sabah, after Project IC was implemented, the only outcome for any Sabah state government would be a Muslim majority government because the Muslim community had the largest number of seats in Sabah.
Another reason for suspicion is the change in Sabah's census categories. This started in 1980, combining all indigenous ethnic groups and Malays under one category called Pribumi. In this peer-reviewed study, the author observed how census data had been manipulated to cover up for the process of documentary citizenship for the benefit of UMNO. Rogue